We are delighted to have as our guest speaker for our special Assembly Day, Brother David Splane of the governing body and his wife Linda. We eagerly anticipate Brother Splane's first address to our special Assembly Day entitled, Keeping a Simple Eye in a Wicked World. Brother Splane, please.
Well, as our custom is, it's a pleasure to be able to transmit to all of you the warm love and best wishes both of the governing body and of the United States Bethel family. Your brothers at Bethel love you all very much, and they're anxious for you to know that. Now, think about the theme of this discussion. Keeping a simple eye in a wicked world. That's quite a challenge, because life in this system of things, life in this wicked world, if you will, is anything but simple. Now think about the commercial aspect, secular work. Today, with unemployment problems, with economic hardships, people feel that they need their jobs, and they do. And employers take advantage of this, and it's not uncommon for employers to demand that someone work 50, 60, or 70 hours a week. And people do it. And some of our brothers find that they're a little bit reluctant to ask for all 3 days of the district convention off, or both days of the circuit assembly off, because they're afraid that they'll lose their job, and they're afraid that if they do, they won't get another one. Now, think about the educational system. It's not uncommon today in elementary schools to find teachers giving out homework to kids who are 10, 11, 12 years of age, 2 and 3 hours a night. Now, there's a purpose behind this. It's to get them ready for high school, when they might have to spend 4 or 5 hours a night on homework. And there's a purpose behind that. It's to get them ready for university, when it won't be uncommon for them to pull an all-nighter, as they say, spend all night long, sometimes with a worldly lab partner, on homework assignments. And there is a purpose behind that. It's to get them ready for the corporate world, when it will not be uncommon for employers to demand that they spend 50, 60, or 70 hours a week in their secular work. Well, what do you call that? Pressure. And with all that pressure, we can understand that people would sometimes feel just a little tinge of resentment when someone comes along and asks them to do one more thing than what they're already doing. And how do they react? We have too many meetings. We have too much to read. You can't expect me to go in field service on the weekends after I've worked so hard all week. And so sometimes we blame the spiritual activities for the pressure we feel. But brothers, is that really fair? Who ever got a migraine from reading the Bible? Or acid indigestion from conducting a Bible study? Or who ever had a heart attack as a result of listening peacefully to a public talk? These are not the things that are the source of our tension. And yet when we feel under pressure and we feel that we have to cut something, the tendency is to cut where we should be adding and to add where we should be cutting. And so often, friends, the spiritual things are the first things that we cut in our lives. Now that works well for the devil, because the devil knows that we need spiritual activities. We need to maintain an active spiritual life. Why? Titus chapter 2 and verse 12 tells us why. Let's turn there. Titus chapter 2 and verse 12. He says that God is instructing us to repudiate ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live with soundness of mind and righteousness and godly devotion amid this present system of things. So what's the point? Well, in this world, in this system of things, we find ungodliness. We find worldly desires. And instead of cultivating them, they are to be repudiated. And how are you going to get the strength to repudiate those worldly desires? How are you going to get the strength to repudiate ungodliness? Well, you have to have something spiritual behind you. We think of young Ethan, who was just interviewed here. Where did he get the strength? To go to his coach, first day of class, and tell him, "Now, coach, what you've asked me to do, I cannot do." Where did Raven get the strength to tell people that she was proud of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses? It didn't come from nowhere, did it? She had to have that spiritual reservoir, and she had to be able to reach down deep in that spiritual reservoir and bring up something that was going to strengthen her so that she could face worldly people. And so the Bible tells us that none of us are strong enough to cultivate worldly desires. None of us are strong enough to cultivate ungodliness and still remain in the truth. We have to repudiate these things because the world is wicked. And sometimes people don't believe that. Sometimes our young people don't believe that. They hear us talk about the world. They hear us talk about how bad it is and how we have to keep away from it. But sometimes they're thinking to themselves, it's not really all that bad. I can handle it. But can you really? Reminds me of something that appeared on the National Geographic Channel some time ago. They were taking pictures of animals, as they often do. And in one case, the setting was in Africa. And you saw this crocodile in Africa who was lying in the sun peacefully. And there was a little monkey nearby. And this little monkey, he was not an adult monkey, just a little monkey. He was climbing up and down the trees, and then all of a sudden he spotted this crocodile. Well, he was fascinated by this crocodile. And so he crept over, and he got real close to the crocodile, and he hit him on the head. And then he turned around and scampered away. That crocodile didn't even open one eye. Well, he got away with that. So he climbed down the tree, he scampered across the bush, and he hit the crocodile on the head again. And then he turned around and scampered away. That old crocodile didn't even budge. Wow, this was fun. So, the little monkey, after a little bit of time went by, he climbs down the tree again, creeps over, and that was the end of the monkey. Now, why did he do it the third time? Because he got away with it the first two times. And that's what really gets our young people into trouble today so often. They hear the advice about not cultivating worldly associations. They hear the advice about not going to worldly parties and so on. But they go, and they get away with it. They hit the crocodile on the head, and nothing happens. Once, twice, maybe 3 times. But how long are you going to be able to hit that crocodile before he turns around and swallows you whole? Well, there are a lot of young people who are no longer with the truth, who could testify to the truthfulness of this. Well, now, many of us would say, I would never get involved in things that are really wicked. But notice what verse 12 of Titus said. It says that we should repudiate ungodliness, but we should also repudiate worldly desires. And some of those things may seem quite innocent in themselves. What would happen, for example, if we allowed hobbies, sports, TV, video games, the internet, and education to get out of hand? Well, these things which may appear to be innocent enough in themselves, these could become a snare to us. Now, what about technology? What about the computers? My word, I don't know what we'd do without computers these days. They have really made our lives much more easy. And of course, try and get a typewriter today, or try and find somebody who can fix a typewriter. We'd have to go back to writing things out by hand. And I think because we're using the computers so much, our handwriting is getting atrocious. So the computer has turned out to be quite a useful tool. And you can go on the internet, as our researchers in the writing department do in Bethel, and you can find some very interesting things. But like so many things that do have a good use, they can be abused. There's a website that a number of our young witnesses have started to get involved with called myspace.com. Have you ever heard of it? Well, it started out innocently enough. The idea was that it was just going to be a bio page where people could post a little bit of information about themselves. But some time back, some parents in one circuit decided that they were going to go on this website, and they were going to do a search and see if any of their children, grandchildren, or if any of the young people in the circuit had a page on this website. And they were absolutely astounded at what they turned up. Not only did they find that many of the young folks had a page on this website, but some of the things that they put on this page describing themselves, the sexual positions that they preferred, and all that sort of thing, it was absolutely degraded. Now, why were these young people doing this, and why were they so open about it? Well, they never thought that their parents were going to check. But it makes you wonder what was going on in their minds. What kind of desires are they cultivating? Well, maybe some of you parents, when you go home tonight, it might be a good idea to go on the internet and do a search for your child's name, your grandchild's name, maybe some in the congregation, and see if there are some young folks around here who are on myspace.com. But you see, here is a perfectly good tool that is being abused. One young brother was heavily involved with computer games. His watchtower was never prepared on Sunday. His New World Translation, I'll say it was new. He never opened it. And he found that when he went to the meetings, his mind wasn't on the meetings. He was losing his joy. He found the truth boring. He knew it was the truth, but he was finding it boring. And this worried him, because deep down, this was a young person who loved Jehovah. And he knew that he was going to have to take drastic action. So what did he do? He deleted all of his computer games. How did he feel about it? He said, that was really tough. I was more attached to the games than I had thought. But I also experienced a great feeling of victory because I knew that I had done it for my own good. Now, here's a young person who had the courage to cut where it counts. And if we don't learn to control these things will end up by controlling us. I think it was Brother Davis that talked about the technical world and how you almost have to become a technological expert just to operate something that was very easy in the past. My wife and I bought a bathroom scale a couple of weeks ago. You have to be a mechanical engineer to operate this bathroom scale because it measures your body fat and it measures it. You have to put your height in there and all kinds of different things. And my goodness, it used to be that you put the scale on the floor, you stepped on the scale, and that's all there was to it. It's much too easy these days. And so we have this article here that was published in the Washington Post some time back. And I think it put a finger on the problem all right. It says, when aircraft and automobiles became commonplace, Americans didn't use the time saved in travel to hang out on the beach. They just traveled farther, did more work, earned more money, built bigger houses farther out of town that required more upkeep and longer commutes. Employers rewarded stellar employees with raises and promotions, thus more responsibility and more work, and not with, say, an extra month of vacation time. In the past, people overworked, but commonly because they were forced to by poverty or impelled by a sense of duty. Now, work can be a neurotic addiction. Workaholic is a 20th century word, one suspects, because it is a 20th century type. And this article went on to describe how, just as I think it was Brother LaForge mentioned Proverbs 27 and 20 about man never being satisfied. And it says, once you had cable and a nice television, the number of cable channels proliferated, high-definition broadcast became the norm, and then plasma flat screens. More choices, more new things to buy, more work required to keep up. Cell phones. Used to be that a telephone, you just picked up the telephone and said hello, and that was all there was to it. Now you can take people's pictures. You can even go on the internet, and you can even text message someone who's sitting in the same room. And that's a cell phone. Technology. People, they invented the washing machine, a wonderful invention. Most people have a washing machine and a dryer in their home. Did it cut down on washing? No. We wash more often now because we can. They invented these great big sitting lawnmowers, like a tractor. So what did we do? We bought bigger yards. So now we have more grass to cut because we can. So technology doesn't always cut down on the work. So can you see the wisdom of what Brother Davis brought to our attention? The need to keep it simple. The need to keep a simple eye. Do we really need all of the things that we have? How many people have exercise equipment in their rec room that is almost brand new? They bought it because they thought that they were going to use it sometime. They used it twice. It'll go in a yard sale one of these days. We buy so many things that we really aren't going to use. And so that's why we need to put the primary emphasis on the spiritual things. Do you remember the drama we had this summer, the drama of Timothy. And you remember Timothy's boyhood friend, and I think his name was Jonathan, and his wife Persis. And Jonathan, of course, was a workaholic. And when he finally came to his senses, Persis, his wife, said that when we were doing all of this work, we said we were doing it to provide for the children, but really our family was being neglected. And that is so true. It is so possible. In our sincere efforts to provide materially, we can be neglecting the spiritual interests of our children. Now, as we read Ephesians chapter 5, I'd like you to try to find the connection between this text and the matter of keeping a simple eye. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 17. It says in verse 15, "So keep strict watch." Well, there's that word watch. That would have something to do with the eye, the spiritual eye, wouldn't it? Keep strict watch, that how you walk is not as unwise, but as wise persons, buying out the opportune time for yourselves, because the days are wicked. On this account, cease becoming unreasonable, but go on perceiving, well, there's the eye again, isn't it? Go on perceiving what the will of Jehovah is. Well, we could spend an hour on these verses. We won't. They'll get me off the platform if I try that. But now, notice what he says first. Paul says, if you're going to succeed in the truth, you have to be strict with yourself. How often do parents who are trying very hard to keep their young folks in the truth, and who have rules that their parents and their parents' parents before them passed on. In our house, meeting attendance is not optional. In our house, field service on Saturday morning is not optional. In our house, we don't watch R-rated movies. But how often do parents who are making these choices because they are fighting for the spiritual lives of their children, how often are they approached by other parents who say, you're being too strict. If you're not careful, you're going to lose your kids. But what is Paul telling us here? Paul is telling us that if we're going to survive spiritually in this wicked world, he says the days are wicked, we have to be strict with ourselves. We have to keep strict watch on how we are walking. And what does it involve, this strictness? Verse 16, buying out. Now, when you buy something, you have to part with some of your hard-earned cash. And that hurts, doesn't it? It's a sacrifice. So if you're going to get something worthwhile, you have to pay. And Paul is telling us, if you're going to make time to do the things that you need to do, you're going to have to pay. You're going to have to give up some things that you may enjoy doing. And then in verse 17, he says, on this account, cease becoming unreasonable. Now that's a twist, isn't it? Very often when we think of someone who is unreasonable, we think of someone who is being too strict. But here Paul is saying that it's the one who is too casual. It's the one who is too liberal. It is the one who is not being strict with himself, who is being unreasonable. So he says, cease becoming unreasonable, but go on perceiving what the will of Jehovah is. Well, isn't that a beautiful thought? And doesn't it really solve a lot of problems? For example, if you're trying to decide whether to let your kids go to some party, you ask yourself, Well, what would Jehovah want me to do in this case? Now, I know that Jehovah isn't against fun, but now will there be proper supervision? Do I really know who is going to be at that party? Well, they say, yes, there's going to be a couple of elders and their wives there, and there's going to be proper supervision. Fine, you let the kids go, but then are you going to phone and check up and make sure that the adults who were supposed to be there are really there? Well, the kids might complain about that a little bit. They might say, what's the matter? Don't you trust us? Of course, we don't trust you. We're adults, and we don't trust ourselves. We can't trust ourselves because, as the brothers mentioned this morning, our heart is treacherous. We can't trust ourselves. Why would we trust you? We love you. We want you to have life, but we certainly don't trust you. So you phone and you make sure that the adults who were supposed to be there really are there, and that this is really good association for your children. They may balk, but you're doing it because you are fighting for their spiritual lives. You are doing it because you love them so much. I was so impressed with the family of one brother. He had 8 children, and the 20-year-old was a pioneer, and the 19-year-old was a pioneer, and the 18-year-old was a pioneer, and the 17-year-old was in the last year of high school, and she was going to pioneer. But I was looking at the 16-year-old, because he wasn't like the others. He had a bit of an attitude, and you could see that his view of spiritual things just wasn't the same as the others. And I was really quite worried about him. We were in the traveling work at the time. We visited the congregation, and 6 months later we came back, and here was the 16-year-old, now 17, passing the microphones in the Kingdom Hall. And he had his kingdom ministry there, and his kingdom ministry was underlined. And he had such a beautiful attitude. And so I invited him out in the service with me on Saturday morning. And as we were working along, I said, you know and I know what you were like 6 months ago. I said, I want to know what your dad did to you. And he laughed. He said, it's true. I had an attitude back then. But he said, one night, my dad sat down with me. And he said, Mom and I know that you don't have the same view as the others toward the truth. But I just wanted to let you know, we love you so much that we are not going to allow you to leave the truth. So if you're thinking about it, I'm here to tell you, it is not going to happen. And he said, I realized I didn't have the choice. So he went along with the others, and he turned out to be a marvelous regular pioneer. As far as I know, he's still pioneering. I saw him a couple of years ago, still pioneering. His dad loved him enough to fight for his spiritual life. Well, brothers, we're all engaged in a fight for our spiritual lives as well. And so we need to, as mentioned, have something in our spiritual reservoir that we can draw from, that we can defend ourselves with. And we're going to talk about that in connection with you young people this afternoon. So how are our personal study habits? Are we reading every issue of the Watchtower and Awake? Now the Awake only appears once a month. Perhaps we weren't getting all of the articles in Awake read before, but is there any reason why we can't find an hour and 15 minutes a week to read either the Watchtower or the Awake? Is our schedule really that tight? What about our Bible reading? We're just told to read the Bible every day. Read the daily text. And friends, so often those who are the most successful at staying in the truth are those that follow the simple instructions. They're told to buy out the time. They realize that doesn't come from the faithful and discreet slave. That comes from Jehovah God. Jehovah God says, buy out the time. And so they do. And so they stay in the truth. They remain strong. They keep a simple eye lead a relatively simple life. Well, when we keep our eyes simple, as the brothers have mentioned, Jehovah makes a commitment to us. He says that our basic needs are going to be met. Now, Matthew 6:33 does not say, keep on seeking the kingdom and all these other things will be added to you. It doesn't say that. It says, keep on then seeking first the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. So, what lessons are we teaching our children? Are we teaching our children that they have to put the kingdom first? For example, when it's book study night, and your young 14-year-old comes home and he has a pile of homework, do you let him stay home from the book study to do his homework? Well, what lesson are you teaching him? What are you telling him about what comes first in life? For generations, there's been homework. And for generations, parents told their children, you can do your homework before or after the meeting, but you're not going to miss the meeting for homework. And these kids got an education. They learned how to read and write. They graduated from high school, and they stayed in the truth. So what's wrong with that? We don't need to reject all of the methods of child raising that other generations adopted just because we want to do something new. Sometimes you hear parents say, well, I was raised rather strict and I'm not going to raise my kids the way I was raised. Why not? You turned out fine. Ask your wife. So why would we reject the methods that were so successful in raising us? Brother Davis quoted the Apostle Paul's words, if we have sustenance and covering, we will be satisfied. We will be content with these things. That doesn't come from just the faithful and discreet slave. That comes from Jehovah God. Now, it's not advice that is just addressed to pioneers. It's addressed to everybody. And you can see that advice like this helps us to make decisions in life. If you are going to be content with sustenance and covering, how many university degrees do you need? Just to have sustenance and covering. So you can see how the wonderful principles of God's Word can be so helpful to us in making the kinds of decisions that we need to make in life, to help us to understand how to keep a simple eye. The world can provide us with a temporary means of life, but only Jehovah God can give us life. Satan wants to deprive you of that. Don't give him the satisfaction. Keep a simple eye, and don't let anything in this wicked world distract you.
Thank you, Brother Splane, for that timely and interesting instruction.